How does a young man who's a personal trainer, who's writing programming workouts to the wee of the night, decide that I want to write books, I want to launch a podcast, which is one of the most popular podcasts out there? Did you always have goals and aspirations to do what you're doing now?
Identify your unique skill sets in life, what it is that God made you good at, what you feel called to do, what you love to do.
And the number one regret was not living a life true to yourself, but what other people expected of you.
And since I've really embraced this idea of not only returning to my youth as far as the things that I did enjoy, that I know really fuel me and have fueled me since I was a boy.
I don't believe long-term ketosis is healthy. I call it keto flexing, which is carb cycling. And you talk about it in your book.
Long-term strict ketosis may not be advantageous for everyone.
Hey Keto Camper, Ben Azadi here, best-selling author of 3 books, founder of Keto Kamp. In this interview, we have the one, the only, Ben Greenfield. We're going to discuss his brand new book, Boundless, and he is a best-selling author, New York Times best-selling author, and his new book is outstanding. It is so thick, and we dive deep into it. We also talk about the importance of movement and living on purpose with your purpose. It's a deep conversation we get into with Ben. And then we talk about the best biohacks, if you will, for down-regulating your glucose level so you could live longer and burn those blood sugars via the GLUT4 transporter. And we discuss keto and fasting, and you're just going to love Ben Greenfield. You already know who he is, so let's bring him on the show.
All of you know who Ben Greenfield is. He's a New York Times bestselling author. He's also the author of this brand new book, which is pretty heavy. And we're going to go into this baby right here, which is called Boundless: Upgrade Your Brain, Optimize Your Body, and Defy Aging. So without further ado, let's bring on the man of the hour, Ben Greenfield. Hey, Ben.
Hey, dude, did you know you spelled the word camp wrong? I think it's with a C.
Oh, shoot. You know, it's been 2 years. You're the first person who just let me know. It's funny because I got to always tell people. Man. Yeah, I got all the t-shirts. I got the damn sign up. Damn it. It's funny because whenever I mention Keto Kamp, I'm always saying camp with the K, just so people know how to look it up. But I have a question for you right off the bat. How does a young man who's a personal trainer, I used to be a personal trainer too, by the way. How does a young man who's a personal trainer, who's writing programming workouts to the wee of the night, decide that I want to write books, I want to launch a podcast, which is one of the most popular podcasts out there? Did you always have goals and aspirations to do what you're doing now?
No, like I own a supplements company, and it drives my CEO crazy because I just like wake up from bed in the morning, pursue my passions, kind of do as extraordinary a job as I can with whatever God has put on my plate for that day, and generally just kind of try to make good decisions. And I work really hard, and I follow the golden rule of just trying to love other people as much as possible, with whatever my purpose in life is, whatever my passions and my skill sets happen to be at the time. And I mean, as silly and simplistic as it might sound, part of it just comes down to me pursuing my passions and the things I happen to be interested at the time, whether it's free diving and spearfishing or triathlon or Spartan or anything like that. And then just kind of writing about things, teaching people about things, trying out different diets, different supplements, different fitness modalities, and just kind of immersing myself in the stuff I love to do, and then turning around and teaching other people about what I've learned. That's kind of like been my model. But honestly, as far as the personal training thing goes, for me, kind of that shift towards wanting to do more media, more, I guess, arguably sit at home in your underwear, writing blog posts and recording podcasts and writing books type of stuff, was basically the birth of my twin boys 12 years ago. It really motivated me to try to shape, at least as far as the logistics of my career, a scenario in which I could be at home a lot more, homeschooling them and spending time with my children, compared to what I was doing at the time, which was just like living at a gym. I owned all these personal training studios and gyms in Idaho and Washington. I was pretty much just like driving from gym to gym, training clients from 5 a.m. in the morning till 9 p.m. at night, and then coming home and hanging out with my wife. And that's not really conducive to family life. It's not exactly 9 to 5. So I kind of reshaped my career mostly just to be a better family man.
Do you believe in the thought process of work-life balance, or do you fall in the philosophy of just everything life?
I guess I fall into the philosophy of self-actualization, right? Identify your unique skill sets in life, what it is that God made you good at, what you feel called to do, what you love to do when you were a kid, what makes time go by quickly for you now, what puts a big smile on your face. For me, it's things like writing and reading and researching, and then, if you really shape your career around those passions and interests, you're really gonna live a more self-actualized life, in which not only does work feel a little bit more like play. Not to say that work isn't still hard, and there's certainly days when I gotta sit down and churn out some 3,000 word article on some scientific topic, and sometimes I'd rather be I don't know, like experimenting with some pork belly recipe up in the kitchen, because that feels more self-actualized to me in the moment. But I do it and I work hard, but I still enjoy it. I find it deeply fulfilling. And the same could be said of work life balance. I mean, for me, when I'm playing tennis with my kids, or making a meal with my wife, or playing music with the family, or journaling and meditating, or working out in the yard, or taking care of the goats and chickens, or whatever, a lot of that kind of feeds into what I do in my work, and reflects a lot of the little things that I teach in my blog or my podcast. And so, I probably have a little bit of um of uh I guess like a jaded approach, just because I happen to be blessed to be able to do a lot of the things that really heavily relate to my work. And so work life balance is a little bit easier for me. But really, I think if you're self-actualized, if you've identified a purpose in life that really fuels your passions, and you're steering your life in that direction, then work life balance becomes less tricky to arrange.
Well said. Yeah, I've done a lot of work personally determining my highest values with the work of like Dr. John DeMartini, and it really helped inspire me to live on purpose with
Yeah.
my unique purpose. And I've heard you say before, Ben, you referenced the book that I read as well, the top 5 regrets of the dying, and the number one regret was not living a life true to yourself, but what other people expected of you. So could you share a little bit about that, and how that's something that you don't want to experience throughout your life?
Yeah, that's a really powerful article slash book by Bonnie Rare, I think is the gal,
Right.
the palliative care physician who generated those 5 regrets. I wish I'd chosen to be my true authentic self more than what the world expected me to be. I wish I'd stayed in touch with old friends. I wish I'd chosen to be happy more. I wish I'd shown my true emotions, and I wish I hadn't worked so hard. I think those are the top 5. And regarding that first one that you alluded to, um this idea of being your true authentic self, we do live in an area, or in an era that even um kind of like more dramatically emphasized due to social media, and the ability to be able to see so many other people's lives and have so many other people commenting on your life, that there's a lot of peer pressure to be someone other than who you truly want to be. I've had to deal with that, like deep down in my core, like I'm a just like a total creative romantic. I grew up playing chess and playing violin, and reading and writing fantasy fiction. I was homeschooled. I wasn't the kind of kid you look at and expect to be like a jock or a performance enthusiast. And a large part of my early years in kind of adolescence and teenagerhood involved me really wanting to prove to the world that I was cool. And I got good at things like weightlifting and bodybuilding and tennis and sculpting my body, and being kind of like a badass, don't mess with me, total, male yang role model. Really to a large extent because I thought that was cool. And I spent, I spent probably 15 years of my life a little bit more disconnected from my creative self uh, than um, than would have been ideal, in terms of not really exploring areas that I also find deeply fulfilling, like fiction, like music, like, cooking and, a lot of these things that I just didn't think were cool. And I don't have any regrets. I'm totally grateful for the path that I've been given in life, because, a lot of my deep delving into, biohacking and fitness and ultra performance and all these masochistic endurance events I did for so long that taught me a lot about physiology and nutrition and recovery and biohacking modalities and everything else. I mean, that's been wonderful for me in terms of accelerating my learning career and my career as a whole. However, I would say that had I stayed on that path and not delved into a lot of the things I'm doing now, I'm writing songs and learning a lot of kind of mixing tactics in my home studio, and I'm writing fiction, I'm reading more fiction, I'm playing a lot more music, I'm spending a lot more time kind of close to earth, plant foraging and bow hunting and fishing and doing a lot of these things I neglected for a long time, just because I was being a badass fit guy, who could rip off my shirt and, throw spears and, do Spartan races and triathlons and stuff like that. And, I find in the health and fitness community, there are a lot of people who are doing those things, attempting to create a body or a physique or a health status that doesn't necessarily reflect their true authentic self, but it's just what they think the world perceives as cool. And because of that, I think a lot of people are disconnected from their true selves, which, I mean, a trauma researcher named Gabor Mate, he defines trauma as just being disconnected from your true authentic self. And since I've really embraced this idea of not only returning to my youth as far as the things that I did enjoy that I know really fuel me and have fueled me since I was a boy, the creative romantic side of me, and also embrace the spiritual side, more prayer, more meditation, more union with God, more worship, more involvement with the church, more journaling, more solo time, a lot of the things that would be considered spiritual disciplines. I find myself far more deeply fulfilled than I think I would have been had I just stayed on the path of just pure, I guess just like pure fitness or pure, very, very, very masculine, show your body off to the world, be who the world expects you to be type of mentality, because I did spend a lot of time just trying to be the cool jock when in fact that's not who I am at my core. So yeah, I think it's super important to embrace your true authentic self and understand that, well, that you are going to find that the world might perceive some elements of that not to be cool. In the long run, it doesn't come down to what the world expects you to be, but instead comes down to, loving other people, loving God, and being your true authentic self. And especially if you're your true authentic self and you're following the golden rule, meaning you're not your true authentic self as an asshole who doesn't care about what anybody else thinks, but instead you're your true authentic self because you want to bring your best self out to the world to give to people as much as possible based on the unique skill set that you have. Then, I think that that's really a way to avoid being on your deathbed and being full of regrets just because you were jumping through the hoops that other people expected of you, rather than being your true authentic self.
Speaking of loving on others, have you ever been challenged personally with hateful comments on social media? And how do you respond to that? Do you send them love and prayers? Have you ever had a challenge with yourself whenever you see those comments come in?
I generally don't engage for a few reasons. First of all, there's that cartoon that kind of has been viral on the internet for a while. The guy up late on the computer and his wife, is coming in trying to get him to go to bed, and he's like, I can't. Somebody on Twitter is wrong. And there are people that spend a lot of their times on forums and on Twitter threads and in the comment section of their blogs and in the Instagram messages, just replying to everyone, because there's kind of a deep-seated ego that wants to ensure that if someone has disagreed with you on something, it's your prerogative to prove or to argue that you are right. And I get that. I get that there's a healthy amount of human pride, but sometimes that ego can pull you into spending time replying to a lot of those comments and laying out solid arguments for whatever it is that you believe in, but it might not be your best use of your time. I understand it can move the dial a little bit to engage, but you get to a certain point where it's just, you just, especially, as I found my own social media platform grows, you just can't keep up. I used to pride myself on replying to all the messages and just being there for everyone. And you just can't, especially when it comes to trolls and people who want to start long arguments that just never end, people who don't want to, be convinced of a viewpoint that might be contrary to theirs, but people who just want to argue for argument's sake, who want to be a troll for trolling's sake. And that, it can be very draining. It can induce a lot of negative energy in your life. So I generally avoid. Now, just because I'd rather be, making a snowman with my kids than jumping into some Twitter comment about, the exact number of macros that you need to maintain nutritional ketosis or something like that. And then the other part of it is, I'm also a big believer, in, books like Gary Keller's One Thing or Tim Ferriss's 4 Hour Work Week that dictate that you should really try to outsource a lot of the things that aren't the best use of your time or the things that don't satisfy your purpose best to people who do an amazing job at and love to do those things, right? So I have a few social media assistants who are really able to, to monitor comments and monitor messages. And if there's something that I really need to reply to, then, I'll jump in and reply. But usually it's not because I'm monitoring Twitter and Instagram and Facebook and reading all those messages. It's instead that I have a social media team doing that. And if I really need to jump in because something's way out of control, or, this happens sometimes, like I'll interview somebody on my podcast and then someone will dive into that person's history and find out, oh, hey, let's just throw an example out there. Like this person, 12 years ago, was filed as a sexual offender in state XYZ, and someone will send that over to me. And then, that's a situation where I just want to make sure I put out the fire. I look into, whether or not that's true. Sometimes I'll call the person or email them and get their side of the story. And I just, I never want to be positioned as someone who is giving a platform to people who might be ethically or morally compromised. Like that's a situation where sometimes, if I've interviewed someone like that on a podcast, I won't delete the podcast, but I'll go in and I'll add some clarifying statements. It has come to my attention that such and such has a history of XYZ. I in no way agree with anything that they did. I consider that to be wrong. This podcast does contain helpful information regarding something completely different than, the bad things that person did. But, I'll let my audience know, so basically if there are big fires that need to be put out from a social media or messaging standpoint, I'll do that. But for the most part, aside from that, I just ignore any vitriolic activity or trolling or, long text threads that require just tons of your time, because it's not worth it in the long run compared to other more valuable things that you might be up to.
How many people do you have on your team, your total?
Well, it's kind of interesting because the way that my business is set up is Keon, my supplements company, also owns my brand, Ben Greenfield Fitness. And so that dictates that I've kind of got, when you ask how many people, that includes, entire supplements company, along with everybody running, for Ben Greenfield Fitness, everything from podcast editing to social media, et cetera. And then, I also have an executive assistant who lives near me here in Spokane, Washington, as well as a person who kind of is at my house during the day, helping out with various tasks, just like, mail and processing and secretary type of work, things like that. And so it comes out to about 38 people that I actually have on staff working as either employees or independent contractors.
Awesome. So let's get into your book, Ben, Boundless. This is a big baby right here. How did this spawn? What was the inspiration for this book?
Hey, I want to interrupt this interview real quick with Ben to just say thank you for watching it up until this point. If you're getting any value so far, please smash the thumbs up button here on YouTube and subscribe and hit that little bell so you're notified when we release a brand new video. Check out the show notes and also the show sponsors. Purity Coffee is my favorite keto cup of coffee, organic, mold-free, loaded with antioxidants and polyphenols. Check them out. There's a coupon code as well. And then also Pure Form, which is the best alternative to fish oil, because guess what? Fish oil is mostly toxic. I know, what a shocker. But if you want to get the healthiest alternative to fish oil, check out my friends over at Pure Form. We have an exclusive coupon code as well with them. Links can be found down below. Let's get back to this interview with Ben.
I got really interested in anti-aging and longevity about 3.5 years ago and wanted to write a book on both ancestral science and modern science, or ancestral wisdom, I should say, and modern science as it applies distinctly to anti-aging and longevity. So I wanted to get into, interplay between NAD and sirtuins, for example, or the use of peptides, like Russian peptides and some of the US research on peptides. And I wanted to get into the blue zones and, what a lot of these, centenarian, super centenarian areas are doing to enhance longevity from a more natural standpoint. What kind of teas and coffees are they drinking? What are the polyphenols and flavonols and antioxidants that might be in those compounds? What are the fasting protocols that seem to work? What are the fasting protocols that seem to not work? And as I got deeper into a book on anti-aging and longevity, I realized that there are so many biological mechanisms that underlie aging, from immunity to collagen breakdown to, depletion of NAD to even relationships, spirituality, gratitude, emotions, epigenetics, genetics, etc., that I really need to write a more all-encompassing book that incorporated mind, body, and spirit optimization that went beyond just, how long can you live, but just how much energy can you have each day of the life that you are living. And so it kind of morphed from being a book that was largely going to be focused on anti-aging and longevity to a book that's more of like an all-encompassing blueprint on how to have all the energy that you want at your beck and call every day. So I dug into, digestion and hormones and immunity and performance and fat loss and muscle and just everything under the sun when it comes to how you can kind of understand the human machine and, based on the blueprint behind it, set up your life, your diet, your exercise program, your biohacking modalities, your supplements, your nutrients, everything to basically give you all the energy that you want all day long. And that's why the title wound up being Boundless, have all the boundless energy you want at your beck and call whenever you need it. And so that was kind of how the book came to be. And, the way I write books is I'll generally start a big Google Drive folder, because I like to work in the cloud. Usually I'll have a few people on staff who are scientific editors, researchers, and each folder in that Google Drive is dedicated to each chapter. So I'll have a selection of documents in the Google Drive, and one might be the chapter that I'm working on. One might be people I want to interview. One might be research articles. One might be ideas that didn't make it into the book. One might be, sidebars that we could include in the book that might not be in the body of the text, but that are elsewhere. And then typically there's multiple documents as you go through the editorial phase too, because certain things get cut. I mean, that book was about 1,300 pages when the manuscript got turned in. It's 600 and something now. And so that means that like 600 plus pages were cut from the book, but still lived on in those Google Docs that were like iterations of each chapter. So what I did was, and anybody who owns the book knows this, when you buy the book, you get access to this URL where you can put in your order number and get access to all the stuff that was actually cut from the book that didn't make it out of editorial phases, but there was still, stuff I wrote. I didn't want to kiss my babies goodbye, so to speak. So, I put that all on the website for the book at boundlessbooks.com. And so people can still kind of get a lot of that behind the scenes stuff. But yeah, that's generally how it works. It was about a 3-year process, start to finish, to actually get the book out.
I thought that was a brilliant idea with having access to that online when they make the purchase. Super cool idea. So you have a lot of cool chapters in here. I've been digging in the last few weeks, especially getting ready for the interview. I do want to start with the chapter about keto, of course, because I'm from Keto Kamp here. We do follow a similar philosophy, Ben, in regards that although my company is called Keto Kamp, I don't believe long-term ketosis is healthy. I call it keto flexing, which is carb cycling. And you talk about it in your book. I'm actually writing a brand new book called Keto Flex. Dr. Pompa wrote the foreword. But let's talk about keto. How do we do keto the wrong way? And then how do we do keto the right way?
Well, first of all, you spell flex, PHLEX, based on your spelling mechanisms.
I'm not doing that, no.
Figure out how to spell. You can spell flex with a K, keto flex, FLEKS, maybe something like that.
Yeah, that's true.
Okay, so yeah, I mean, you've already kind of alluded to the fact that long-term strict ketosis may not be advantageous for everyone. And a matter of fact, there's very few use cases for something like that, aside from, say, some forms of cancer or some forms of epilepsy, etc. Like typically long-term strict and significant glycogen depletion can cause some downstream issues, not only for performance, for anybody who likes to exercise. You just know, because I just got done with 30 days of I did strict keto carnivore for 30 days. And the two main things that I noticed, as early as 10 days in, were my wattage on a bike for any effort longer than about 30 seconds just plummeted, right? Just because as soon as you cross over into glycolysis, you see some pretty significant performance decrements. Whereas, if it's a 10, 20, or 30-second long effort that largely relies upon the splitting of phosphagen and creatine, you can get by just fine. But as soon as let's say you're playing soccer or something that might have a longer bout of running, anything that's somewhat glycolytic, sprint, triathlon, Spartan racing, etc., you don't have enough glycogen to go around. Basically, you just can't produce ATP fast enough through the process of beta oxidation or the shuttling of ketones to produce as much energy as you need rapidly for hard and heavy exercise. And I love to swing the kettlebells. I love high intensity interval training. Like, it's one of my favorite ways to stay fit. And so, you see a little bit of an impact on that. And I certainly did, my last kind of strict keto bout, which, like I mentioned, was just very recently. I just finished that like a week ago. The other thing was, I'm 38 years old. I still have good testosterone levels. I'm around, depending when I test, like 800, 900 for total testosterone. And my free T is just fine. It tends to be anywhere from about 80 up to around 120. So I'm good as a percentage of my total testosterone from an endocrine standpoint. But although I didn't do pre and post bloods for this particular keto bout that I was on, which was honestly more of a gut reset. That's what influenced me to do it. I was noting increasingly greater amounts of bloating and gas in response to carbohydrates and fiber, indicating that I probably had a little bit of bacteria. And this is very common, that it kind of moved up into my small intestine. And I knew I needed to starve that off. So I switched to strict keto for a while. And I went keto carnivore just because, honestly, I had a freezer full of meat. So I had tons of, pork belly and ribeyes and a whole pantry full of Wild Planet sardines and anchovies. So it's pretty easy, and also pretty easy on the budget for me to do, just because I had a lot of meat and a lot of fatty cuts around. And that was pretty much what I did, was, meat and bone broth and the like. And so the other thing that I noticed was, I tend to, back to the testosterone piece, I'll tend to have sex dreams. I'll get nighttime boners. I'll wake up pretty horny, be horny at night, and my wife and I we have a great sexual relationship, but that definitely saw a dent. Like, I was not really very high in the libido department. A big part of that is the Leydig cells in your testes. They are going to rely to a certain extent upon adequate glucose. And you do see an impact on the endocrine system with long-term glycogen deprivation. Now, in addition to that, so we know, based on what I just said, men might see a drop in libido, women arguably as well. You're going to see a drop in performance efforts that exceed about 30 seconds in duration if it's a hard effort. And then I was part of Jeff Volek's FASTER study back in, I think that one was 2013 or 14, which involved following a strict, about 90% fat-based intake for 12 months, which was a great way to model the study, right? Because a lot of these studies on low carb, high fat, or ketosis, they do not involve a long enough introductory period to the study for adequate conversion of the human body into efficient fat burning, meaning, if you were to test someone's respiratory quotient, their proportion of carbon dioxide produced and oxygen consumed that reflect the amount of fat burnt, their RQ still hasn't dropped considerably by the time the test starts. And usually it's anywhere from 3 to 6 months to actually begin to be able to burn ketones very effectively or engage in beta oxidation to the extent that you're churning out enough ATP for pretty good energy levels during exercise. And so this study actually had a 12-month period of strict ketosis, and I was in the ketosis group. And then it involved a variety of tests at University of Connecticut, like a VO2 max test, a 3-hour run on a treadmill, muscle biopsies, full blood work, microbiome, etc. And during that period of time, I did do a lot of blood testing to kind of see what my levels were at, and was also tested there in the lab. And while endurance performance was remarkable, because ketones can serve as a throughput for the heart, the diaphragm, for the liver, for the brain, my mental performance was quite acute or acutely increased via that stint of ketosis. Again, I saw almost hypogonadal levels of testosterone. By the time that study ended, I was right around like 250 to 300 around in there. And again, you got to bear in mind, I was also exercising heavily. I was competing in an Ironman triathlon, which will have an impact in and of itself on testosterone, but I had never experienced libido or testosterone levels that low as I did when I was following those 12 months of strict ketosis. I had a lot of joint pain, probably because I didn't have enough glycogen on board for the proper formation of proteoglycans. Like my recovery was diminished. My heart rate variability, which I just began testing, was consistently pretty low. And then my thyroid, my TSH rose to about 6.5, which indicates that I wasn't getting very good T4 to T3 conversion, which is a little bit dependent on glucose as well. So some impacts on endocrine function, thyroid function, performance function, and joint health were the main things that I noticed during that. And that's not uncommon, anecdotally, for a lot of people following strict ketosis, especially a lot of active people following strict ketosis, to experience that. And so when I finished that study, I actually enjoyed a lot of the mental benefits, a lot of the endurance performance benefits that I was getting from ketosis and from strict ketosis particularly. But then I shifted into a lot more of what I do now, which is essentially what you briefly alluded to, cyclic ketosis. And for some people, that's like a weekend carbohydrate refeed. For more active people like myself, or for, athletes, elite performers, people who are exercising pretty hard, bodybuilders, weightlifters, etc., that can be a daily refeed. And for me, based on circadian rhythmicity and timing of my workouts, typically that's an evening carbohydrate refeed, simply because my workouts occur in the afternoon or early evening. And although, yes, insulin sensitivity is technically higher in the morning, dictating that in the absence of an afternoon or an early evening workout, that the timing of the carbohydrates would probably better be with breakfast than with dinner. But there are a few kind of wrenches that get thrown in that equation. I kind of like to tap into a lot of the longevity benefits of intermittent fasting. And so I'm not eating much of a breakfast anyways. And, that goes for a lot of people who are just doing like fats in their coffee or tea for breakfast, which is quite popular in the keto community. And if you throw a wrench in that and say that breakfast is going to be the carb refeed time of the day, it just doesn't work so well. The other thing is that you can induce almost like an artificial state of insulin sensitivity if you just do your hard workout sometime between 4 and 7 p.m. Let's say if you're going to have a 7:30 p.m. dinner, so your upregulation of GLUT4 transporters and insulin sensitivity is remarkably increased with some type of physical activity later in the day, returning you to as big of a state of insulin sensitivity, if not a greater state of insulin sensitivity in the evening than you're at in the morning. And then with that evening carbohydrate refeed, you find a lot of people in the keto and the fasting community, they do see impaired sleep patterns, especially when they completely cut carbs, even more so again in the exercising population. And I find that probably because of the serotonin and melatonin response to carbohydrate intake, I sleep better when I save my carbohydrates for the end of the day. So the way I do things is a later in the day, high intensity interval training or weight training session, dinner that'll include anywhere from 100 to 200 grams of carbs, an intermittent fast of 12 to 16 hours, continued intake of primarily fats, proteins, and depending on the type of diet I'm on, some kind of vegetables during the day, and then rinse, wash, and repeat that with the carb refeed in the evening. And the final thing is, obviously, from an overtraining standpoint, you're not going to do a super hard workout every single day right before dinner. You're just going to tear yourself into the ground by doing that. Now, you can get some amount of insulin sensitivity with just something quick, like 30 burpees, but you can also use some nutritional science to be able to enhance your glucose uptake and insulin sensitivity prior to dinner for a carbohydrate refeed using tactics such as berberine, apple cider vinegar, Ceylon cinnamon, chromium, vanadium. There's a variety of different insulin sensitizing agents that you can use prior to an evening carbohydrate refeed if you aren't doing a hard workout before dinner. From a budget standpoint, from a supplement cost standpoint, and I've tested this with my continuous blood glucose monitor, if you've worked out, you don't get much added benefit from like doing your hard workout before your evening carbohydrate refeed, and then also taking berberine or bitter melon extract or something like that. Like my company, Keon, we make one supplement called Lean, and that's what it is. It's a blood glucose lowering agent. But I've taken that in the presence of a weight training session, and I don't get any better control of blood glucose compared to if I didn't take it. But then if I haven't trained, yesterday was a perfect example. I wear a continuous blood glucose monitor. I took 3 of the Keon Lean before dinner last night, and we had tongue tacos, and we're using like those siete wraps, and then I had a piece of dark chocolate after dinner, and my blood glucose was about 50 to 60 all night long. And so, there's kind of a few different ways to skin the cat when it comes to increasing insulin sensitivity for that carbohydrate refeed. Coming full circle, yeah, that's generally, I think, a better approach, especially for active people. For less active people, a more sedentary population, folks who are just maybe doing a few walks during the week and a couple of strength training sessions, sometimes you can take that same scenario, but just do it on, say, like a Saturday, or instead of having a carb refeed meal every day, have one carb refeed day every week. Like, there's a few different ways to kind of skin the cat.
Yeah, I've heard you speak before about upregulating the GLUT4 transporters to help make you more insulin sensitive and pack some of the blood sugar into your muscle and liver cells versus storing it as fat. You had mentioned, I think before, you used to go in restaurants, you used to go to the bathroom, do some squats, and go back to the dinner table. Right. So what are some other things we can do to help upregulate that GLUT4 transporter?
Top of the totem pole is cold. There's nothing for controlling glycemic variability throughout the day that I have found to come close to cold. And that's just via my own measurements with a blood glucose monitor, and then repeating that with several of the clients who I work with. And what I mean by that is not an intense, like 10 to 20 minute ice bath, but it could be something as simple as 2 to 3 minutes of, like, pretty cold, like an actual ice bath. It can be about a 5-minute cold shower. It can be a brisk 30-minute walk outside, minimally clothed in cold weather. It can be a dip into a cold ocean or river or lake or pool where you're swimming for around 15 to 20 minutes. But, I've had like trips to Europe where there was one recent trip to Italy where, just because I was in Italy and I was eating a lot more like gelato and bread and wine, but where I was staying was quite close to a lake. And so I'd hike about a mile to the lake each morning, do a soak and a swim for about 15 to 20 minutes. And my average blood glucose coming out of 2 weeks in Italy was 70. And, wow. and that, I'm normally, upper 80s. And I think a big part of that was just that cold soak every single day. So cold has a pretty significant impact on blood glucose regulation. And I'm often asked about heat. Yeah, so heat, you get a really steep norepinephrine response to something like a sauna session, and and you see a sympathetic nervous system activation that kind of similar to the blood glucose rise that you would see after drinking a cup of coffee, which is quite common, or even after doing a hard exercise session. A lot of people will be slightly hyperglycemic after a hard exercise session. The thing is, afterwards, when you get out of the sauna, you see, and they've done research on this, most of the research on it is in rodent models, but increased insulin sensitivity, right? Improved glucose utilization due to the upregulation of blood flow to skeletal muscle. And in diabetic rats who did it was either a 30 or 60 day bout of hyperthermia, they saw almost a return to non-diabetic blood glucose management and insulin sensitivity. So it's weird because with heat, you see an acute increase in blood glucose, but then long-term chronic sauna use, you actually see an improvement in glucose management and insulin sensitivity. So I'm a fan of both cold and heat. There's just some subtle nuances that you need to be aware of if you're one of those people who's wearing a continuous blood glucose monitor and might, freak out and be like, oh, sauna's throwing my blood glucose out of control. It's a temporary rise, initial stress response, but then long term actually improve resilience or increase your ability to be able to handle stress. That's kind of what the sauna does. So I'd say cold is good, heat is good, and probably other than the insulin sensitizing agents that I named off, a few of those herbs and spices, and then like a strength training session towards the end of the day, low level physical activity during the day. And again, most of the people I work with, they'll wear a CGM or do regular, like quarterly blood testing. And I've found the sweet spot for most people is at least 10,000 steps a day, and preferably closer to 15,000. And it's kind of shocking because I'll start working with a lot of people who are fitness enthusiasts and, CrossFitters and the like, and they'll do, and this is a well-known phenomenon that, they'll do a hard workout session at 6 a.m., but then almost kind of either hypercalorically compensate because they worked really hard that morning, or else just sit around more. And these hardcore exercise enthusiasts, you'll look at their step count, they're like 6,000 to 8,000, right? And I see better blood glucose management in people who are like saving all their phone calls to walk. While you and I are talking, for people not watching the video, I'm walking on a treadmill. I do that a lot. Just using any excuse that you can to commute, to walk. When I travel, a lot of times I've been in situations where, I'm at an Airbnb with a bunch of people and we want to go grab groceries, and I pull up like Whole Foods on Google Maps, and it's like, 2 miles away. And I say, great, let's go get some groceries. I start walking down the road and everybody's piling into the car. Like, what are you doing? I'm like, I'm walking to Whole Foods to get groceries. And it's a foreign concept to a lot of people, but kind of restructuring your day, your office experience, your life, etc., just to be able to walk or move as much as possible. That's a really good blood glucose management strategy as well. So those are a few of the things that I found to be pretty effective.
Yeah, that's interesting what you shared about the sauna. I was wearing a CGM for a couple of months, and I live in Miami. It was super hot here during the summer. It's still hot. So I would go for a walk with my dog, and I would notice that my glucose would actually go up, and it was not a sauna type of heat, but I was really hot. And then I'd come back home in a cool environment, and it dropped right back down. So that's interesting that you shared that. What's the longest you've ever done strict carnivore for?
Strict carnivore, 30 days.
30 days. That was this year?
Yeah, that was just recently. Yep.
Oh, that was the keto carnivore one that you're talking about?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Okay. Yep. And you didn't do blood work for that. I did carnivore 40 days strict this year, and I wanted to kind of see what it did for I have Raynaud's. I wanted to see what it did to my blood work. And everything improved for me. My C-reactive protein dropped, my homocysteine dropped, all my markers improved, and I didn't get that many flare-ups with my autoimmune, which is super interesting. But I also believe, and I want to hear your thoughts, I also believe that there's not one diet that if we follow strict long-term that could benefit us. I believe that eventually we start to lose those results and eventually we could get sick. And I believe that for carnivore as well. So do you align with that? Do you believe that there's not one diet that if we stick to long-term could continue give us benefits?
So there's a few kind of nuances there. First of all, I do agree with folks like Dr. Paul Saladino, who would argue that you can get all the nutrients and vitamins that you need from meat, aside from perhaps some electrolytes and minerals that you might get from salt. And I do think that's the case. I think that human beings can survive on a strictly all meat diet, assuming that it's a properly comprised nose to tail based diet.
And by survive, do you mean also thrive, or just survive, get by?
Depends on the environmental context, level of physical activity. For example, I don't think an Ironman triathlete or a serious CrossFit or someone like that could, simply because they need more glycogen because they've chosen what one might argue is a little bit more unnatural activity in terms of energy output, when from an ancestral standpoint, human beings would have attempted to conserve energy as much as possible and not put themselves in a scenario where they're rapidly burning carbohydrates. But we're privileged in that we live these lifestyles where we can go climb Mount Everest and do triathlons and swing kettlebells and do races, but all those things do require arguably a higher amount of glycogen and carbohydrates than one can get on a strict all meat diet. So it depends on physical activity. But if someone were simply like walking, gardening, hunting, occasionally lifting some heavy rocks or building fences, etc., I think you can get by just fine on a strict carnivore, nose to tail based diet. Now, that being said, when you look at things epidemiologically, I'll give you a couple examples. Just this morning, I was reading a research paper that showed, I believe it was a Cambodian tribe. They have almost 90 different fruits and vegetables that they consume during the year, which is like 4 times as much as most Americans consume. Wide variety of herbs and spices. We see the same for most blue zones. Most areas where there are a large amount of centenarians, super centenarians, etc. You just see a high intake of plants and herbs and spices. And, another anecdote for you is I was recently reading a book about the Spokane Indian tribe here in Washington, and they had rampant amounts of meat. They would place wicker baskets, under the salmon run and just literally come out with like 800 pounds of salmon a day just from the salmon falling backwards into these buckets. And they could drive bison and buffalo off cliffs and just go, harvest all the corpses at the bottom of the cliff. They were just so prevalent amongst the plains. So it's not like they necessarily needed plants, but the whole time they were doing this, the women were at home, harvesting tubers and berries and leaves and stems and roots. And granted, when you look at this from an epidemiological standpoint, many of these cultures are not only relying upon those type of plants and herbs and spices and roots as food sources, but also as medicine sources and ways to flavor the meats that they are consuming. And so the other thing that I think is important to consider here is the social context, meaning that whereas I'm not disagreeing with, again, guys like Paul Saladino, that plants are kind of survival food, right? Like any wilderness survival camp that I've done, um, the amount of calories I have to burn to plant forage and berry forage, and unless I'm super lucky and just fall into like a gold pot of morel mushrooms or huckleberries or something like that, I'm burning far more calories gathering those plants than I am actually getting from them. And I'm also risking a lot of gastric upset due to the natural built-in plant defense mechanisms of those plants dictating that I have to do further, fermenting and soaking and sprouting and pressure cooking, all of which is calorically expensive. And so I get the idea that those plants, when compared to animal food sources, are less convenient and efficient for both caloric density and nutrient density. But then there's the fact that even if they began as survival foods, a lot of these plants, herbs, spices, salads, vegetables, fruits, etc., they've wound up as staples in a social context that lends a great deal of enjoyment and culinary pleasure to our lives. Like when I go out to sushi, I want the whole sushi roll with the nori wrap and the seaweed salad and the fermented soy miso soup and some dressings and, the pickled ginger and the whole sushi experience. It's just, I mean, don't get me wrong, I could be perfectly happy sitting there eating like a, yellowtail collar or something like that. But there's something about being able to eat all these different elements of God's good planet that I think lends a great deal of happiness to one's life. We had company over the other night and I made these wonderful roasted chickens. And I'm sitting there like chewing the chicken and, I'll eat off the knuckles of the chicken and suck the marrow out and I eat all the skin and, and I'll drink a big cup of bone broth. And then my wife will bring out apple pie because everybody likes to gather around a nice apple pie. We got a fruit orchard in the back. She used a nice little local buckwheat and made this wonderful crunchy crust. And I had that with some coconut ice cream and it was fabulous. I had a big smile on my face. And yeah, I didn't have to have the apple pie from a physical, physiological, biological standpoint, but from a psychological standpoint, it's kind of nice to be able to just enjoy a wide variety of foods. So I don't think you can ignore the social context as well. I find that sometimes, and you might find this too, Ben, with the crowds that we hang out with, sometimes there's a myopic focus on just how a food is processed or the biological effect of it with the psychological component left out. And I think we have to acknowledge some of the happiness that can be derived from eating a wide variety of foods rather than just focusing on something like a nose to tail carnivore based diet. But there's no denying that I think someone can get by just fine for their entire life on a nose to tail based carnivore diet.
Well said. As we wrap this up, I want to ask you one final question here. It's about your book. What's the one thing, if there was one thing, that you want those who read your book to take away from your book?
Well, it's tough to say because I wrote it kind of like a cookbook. Like, somebody would be like, I'm having all these sleep issues, yada, yada. And so we'll flip to chapter 18, where I just decode lighting, circadian rhythms, napping, meditating, breath work, nutrients, supplements, timing of exercise, everything related to sleep. So for that person, that's going to be the most important chapter. Or, if someone's having gut issues, I'll have them flip to the 2 chapters on the gut where I get into everything from, SIBO to mold and mycotoxins and fungus to biofilm to, how to test your gut, different stool panels, etc. And, for that person, the gut might be the most important. So, really, it's a difficult answer, but I'd say the number one thing that I'd want people to get out of the book is that it scratches the itch for their particular need and that it actually contains the scratch for that itch, because I just wanted to cover everything that I could in the book. And so if someone were a little bit more of like they just comprehensively were curious, I would say the main thing I want someone to get out of it is to know their body, their brain, and their spirit better, to just become intimately connected to how their body works, how their brain works, how their spirit is fulfilled, and then know everything that they need to know to optimize those 3 parameters. And so, I got turned down by so many publishers for that book because it has a lot of big words and it's long and it covers a lot of stuff and it's got some controversial things in there, everything from, God to ayahuasca. And so, it's kind of a unicorn of a book, so to speak. And I wound up working with a publisher who was willing to publish the book that, frankly, I wanted to read. And kind of returning full circle to your question about the 5 regrets of the dying, I'd rather publish a book that, based on my true authentic self, is the kind of book that I want to read and have on my bookshelf and return to over and over again. In the words of Ryan Holiday, more of like a perennial bestseller type of approach, rather than write a flash in the pan book that someone's going to read, put down, and never come back to again. So I want this to be like a Bible for people's bodies, so to speak.
I love it. Really respectable, Ben. Where is the best place for the audience to go get the book?
Just boundlessbook.com is fine, even though I think you can get it just about anywhere books are sold. But yeah, boundlessbook.com. We'll just, there's links to Amazon for international listeners. I think we got our international book depository listed on there. And, that's a good spot to go. We got a Kindle version, 40 plus hour long Audible version, and then the hard copy.
Did you read the Audible?
Nope, I did not. That returns to what I was explaining about Gary Keller's One Thing and Tim Ferriss's 4-Hour Workweek. I would have loved to have read the book, and I realized a lot of people really wanted me to read the book. I realized I have a lot of podcast listeners who like to listen to my voice saying the things that I believe, but editing, studio time, etc., all put together, it would have come out to, and this is the way I think about a lot of things, 90 hours that I don't get to be a part of my 2 young boys' formative years. And so I decided to have a really, really great narrator, the same guy who works with me on a lot of podcast stuff, do the reading. And I trained him up well, made sure he knew exactly all the phrases when, anytime he didn't know how to pronounce something, he'd come back to me. And so I think it turned out fantastically, possibly even better than me having read it myself.
What's his name?
James.
Shout out to James, because 40 plus hours. Are you kidding me? That is quite the job. So good job, James. Yeah. I want to acknowledge you, Ben, for being such a pioneer in the space. A lot of the work that I get out there, your fingerprints are all over that. Credit to Dr. John Laurence, who's a good friend of mine who connected us. I drive up and down to his clinic, and just keep shining, man, doing your life on purpose with your purpose. This conversation was fantastic, and I support your mission. I just want to say thank you for getting your work out there into the world.
Sweet up. Thanks, bro. And thanks for your creative alliteration and misspellings. I dig that brand. It's a cool shirt.
Keto Camper, I really hope you enjoyed that conversation with Ben Greenfield. Go check out his book. You can find the link for it down below, the show sponsors down below, and all of the timestamps and resources of everything we mentioned can be found in the description of the video down below. I know that you know that keto done the right way is a powerful way to not just burn fat, but to keep your glucose and insulin levels low so you live a long, healthier life. I have a video where I outline what exactly is keto and how to do it for weight loss. It's a very, very practical video, meaning you could apply this information today to start getting results on keto. Hit that tab right there, watch the video, and you'll be blown away on how to do keto the right way. See you there.